So my background is actually as a lawyer, management consultant. I run my own company, I run other people's companies, and I've also, for my sins, lectured in entrepreneurship. So basically, our program offers a free business review for companies in the creative industry sector earning over $1 million turnover. And we look at how the company's going, what its strategy is, what your vision is, what's happening with HR, what's happening with IT, what's happening with your productisation ideas, whether you can get them off the ground, the revenue. And then give you an action plan. If there's things, setting out a timetable for what you can do yourself, but also if you want to employ an external consultant to help you, so you've been going, I really should get my web page with a retail shop happening. Or maybe I do need to look at getting some employment contracts in place, or maybe I should find out about that IP for my design idea. Then the government will put in $20,000 match funding for use of that external consultant. So I haven't got my lead speech down, but all I can say is I'm free and I come with $20,000. And then there's also this really interesting grant, which is a researchers and business grant. So if you're interested in commercialising an idea, the government will also match funding of up to $50,000 with, say, a PhD student or a master's student. So one of my clients is a film producer, so they're looking at how can we get more into the digitisation space. Someone else is looking at how can we use social marketing to promote our business, and can we use, and then I recently met a lecturer who just supervised someone who did their PhD in internet television. So I'm going around, how can I match this internet television PhD person with a designer or a company out there that, or multimedia company.
What's the name of that grant, please?
Researchers in Business grant. So is that?
That's great. I think it's also worth mentioning that I think we're very lucky living here in Victoria that there is such an emphasis on design. It came as a real surprise to me to learn that, that this was the first time that a federal government initiative had been introduced to this area, and I, for one, am looking forward to learning a lot more about it, because generally when we look at activities to support design, they're largely state-based. I've got a couple of themes that I wanted to talk through tonight. One of them you just mentioned a second ago when you used the word free. Now, there is an assumption that when we look at grants that they are free money. When we talk about things like we look at a program and it says it's dollar for dollar, when you're talking about dollar for dollar, are you talking about cash or in kind? And I know that your program is just one of many programs, but I'll pass it to the other guys. What's normally meant when we talk about dollar for dollar?
It varies per program. So sometimes it means that your dollar has to be matched by a cash component, and a cash component could be anything that would appear on your P&L under an expense account. So it could be salaries, anywhere where you're literally putting money in. Sometimes when you're matching dollar for dollar, your matching component can be in kind. And an in kind would be something that you're not actually paying money for, but you might still be using. It's something that you've already purchased that you're not incurring expense for. It might be equipment, facilities, that sort of thing. We find that in a collaborative approach, if you have 2 or 3 or more companies coming together, sometimes the other partners can contribute things, perhaps the use of a laboratory, use of equipment, computers, that sort of thing, which they're not giving cash, but it has an intrinsic value on it. And if you can put a value on that, you can count back towards your matching dollar for dollar. Now, every program is different, but each of them will specify whether it can be cash, whether it can be in kind, whether it can be a combination of both. Usually it's cash, and usually it's dollar for dollar, but they all vary.
And of course there is the idea that that grants are not for free because it takes a bit of effort to put them together. I'll pass it to Jefferson. When you're raising $8 to $10 million, how many man hours would you expect to expend?
Yeah, hundreds, absolutely. For any grant, in fact, it actually can be quite a similar effort. It's not always proportionate to the size of the grant. That was a big complaint about Comet, because it was only $64,000, and it was almost the same amount of work as a $250,000 ComReady grant. So you have to look into it. And we don't do it ourselves. We do the things we're good at, but we work with people who put the grants in. It's a lot more efficient to do it that way.
Do you have a basic ratio where if you think I'm raising $1 million, it's going to cost me $50,000, or?
No, it's pretty much it's a big fixed amount and then a small proportional sliding scale on top. You would have heard the VCs say that they don't like the small investments because it's the same amount of effort whether you're investing $1 million or $5 million. So it depends on the grant as to how much effort's involved. But not always the amount of money if you do it properly.
What was your experiences, Anthony, when you did it? Was it a hassle? Was it a time killer?
So we were driven by sort of almost make or break. If we didn't get a grant, the chances of us getting further funding from my shareholders were quite slim at that point. And so there was a pretty tunnel vision focus at that point. And at that stage, the business was actually still just me. So I didn't have any staff to worry about or wages to cover. At that point, I got quite a good relationship with the people that helped with the grant at Film Victoria, and really just communicated with them a lot. But the effort was pretty extreme. And what I've found since then, I suppose a little bit of advice to take away from this evening is if you're starting a project and you think you might be applying for grant funding in the future, paperwork will save you so much time in the future. If you can start to document your processes now, for your project, whatever it is you're starting, and you might be getting grant funding in about 6 months. If you can document from day one, it's going to save you a whole lot of heartache later on because you're going to have most of that stuff ready. What I found is I was very bad at documentation, but going through the process, it actually meant at the end I had some really solid documents that we then took to some new investors and actually raised more capital. So not only did we get the funding from the government, but the process actually created the formal documentation a lot of investors want to see to further invest in your ideas. So the overall process of dotting the T's and crossing the I's and going through that rigorous process was actually very beneficial. But many late nights and lots of writing and redrafting, and yeah, it was a pretty
Days? Weeks?
Oh, months.
Months?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose
Meanwhile,
it's
you're
only
still trying to run your
50,000.
business, you know. So
Of course. I also, it's probably, my word on the street is that apparently elements of commercialisation in Australia were added to it, such as the skills-based element, because as entrepreneurs, we tend to be pretty rubbish at doing things like dotting the I's and crossing the T's at some times. We tend to be big picture, and we don't necessarily get our processes in place. So I've heard word on the street that was one of the reasons why commercialisation in Australia has that focus.
I think that's one thing I found post getting a early stage commercialisation as commercial ready grant, is that you probably underestimate not only, it obviously takes a lot of time to put the grant together, but sometimes it takes so much effort just to manage the grant and manage all the paperwork and report the grant. You almost have to, it might be as much as a day a week if you want to get all the documentation right. So it's something to consider in the grant process itself, just the management of the grant. I mean, some grants, for example, if you've got a person working on stuff that you've been doing before and also working on a new prototype product that you're developing, you have to do things like timesheets to prove to an auditor later on down the track that this guy who you said was 80% on this project and charged them out at 80% was in fact 80%. And understandably, the government wants to see exactly where their money went, but sometimes when you're a new business starting out, you don't have those systems in place, and that can kind of catch you out.
I think we'll definitely get there. In a minute, I think I've got a question for Adrian on that exact topic. But I did want to. Now I've got to go between going for the questions or following the script. What do I do? What do I do? Well, I'll tell you what. I did want to ask one thing related to what you said. Of course, your point there clearly articulates that issue that grants are not free. But you did mention that you were talking closely to the people at Film Victoria. You were actually engaging with real human beings and talking to them. A lot of people, I think, when they're looking at a grant, they feel uncomfortable about that, as if somehow they're bribing the judge.
what's wrong with that?